this week with what everyone's watching on TV for the last week, and that's the Olympics in Paris. In our context specifically, though, the Olympic Games really can be seen as one of the world's greatest venues for the exercising of soft power. And when you look at the medal counts, it can often mirror global influence. Not exactly, but at the time of recording today, the U.S. leads the medal count with 72 total medals. China has 52 and France 44. So I'm curious, Miles, as an expert China watcher yourself, what do the Olympics mean for China and the CCP in particular?
Well, Olympics are very different for the Chinese government as opposed to the rest of the world. But for most of the rest of the world, Olympics basically is an opportunity to mark the triumph of individual accomplishments. Yep. Of course, each individual represents a particular sovereign state. But ultimately, it is about the individual triumph. For China, it's a totally mechanism for this state. And this Olympic is particularly poignant because China has a abysmal international reputation right now. I see a poll conducted by Pew, which is probably the most renowned for its accuracy and fairness, just came out a couple of weeks ago. It says China's unfavorable ratings worldwide has been really bad. In France, the host country, the unfavorable rating for China is 70%.
Yikes.
Right? France is the country with the second largest unfavorable rating for China, second only after Sweden.
Wow.
And of course, if you go to the US, go to Japan, go to South Korea, China's unfavorable rating reach as high as 90%. So this is a good opportunity for China to repair its abysmal international reputation. But it's very curious because if you watch the opening ceremony, the loudest cheers were reserved, of course, for the host country, France. The second loudest one for Ukraine. Virtually no cheers for Team China. And the broadcast for the Chinese team's appearance lasts only 10 seconds. So this is basically a where China is. But China comes to Paris with a baggage. The Chinese team basically is scandal-ridden. The most famous one, obviously, was the 23 Chinese swimmers who were tested positive for drug use before the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. Yet the International Olympic Committee, particularly the swimmer regulation, the WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, allow the 23 Chinese swimmers to contend. And they won 3 gold medals and several other silver and bronze medals. So that's a scandal. So that's why the entire swimming events this year in Paris is focused on Chinese swimmers, and which is very unfortunate because the Chinese swimmers were very angry that they were excessively tested and humiliated even. And other swimmers from other countries basically scorn China and treat the Chinese swimmers with suspicion. And this mutual hostility was very obvious. Mutual accusation arose. But then people have to keep in mind, the real culprit is the CCP regime that views Olympics as a global propaganda stage to buttress the legitimacy of the regime. Fewer people care about the gold medals in China, as a matter of fact, because this is something that's very interesting. Of course, there's also the entire issue about China's sports policy, particularly toward the Olympics.
Well, that's what I was going to follow up. You talk about some of the scandals that they've been involved with, but how does the CCP approach international sport in general, or maybe a better way to say it is play politics with international sport?
Well, as I say, the international sports events were used by the government as a way to promote its own image, the party's image, the government's image, not necessarily to celebrate the triumph of individual athletes. But let's go to the specifics. The Chinese government runs the Olympics, sports, and all other international sports programs, but the central government is completely state-run. If you look at the U.S. Olympic Committee, the United States, the Olympics Committee does not receive 1 penny from the federal government. There's no federal government support at all. Not 1 penny from the American taxpayers. It was completely self-funded. through private entrepreneurs, private efforts. But China is different. All professional, all the Chinese athletes are professional members. In other words, there are no other jobs other than being full members of Chinese national team. So they're isolated and they're insulated from the rest of the world in their training cocoons.
Yeah.
There is a wonderful, amazing Chinese diver, a girl by the name of Quan Hongchan. She's 17 years old. She's a national sweetheart and global diving sensation. She's from the peasant family near Guangdong. And her father didn't even know his daughter is in Paris competing for gold medals. And that's how isolated these athletes are. So this is just bizarre. Everything is for the country, for the party.
Yeah.
The second one, I would say that, particularly when it comes to Olympics, China focuses on a few medal-rich but less popular sports, just for the sake of getting more medals, which is nothing wrong. But again, there's a lot more popular sports with much larger participation by the
that's
the
interesting.
People. Now, for China, of course, they focus on two medal-rich events. One is shooting, and the other one is diving. And they're very good at that. So China got a lot of them. There's also another one, medal-rich area, sports, that is swimming. And swimming was, unlike diving and shooting, swimming is very popular.
Yeah.
But swimming is dominated by Americans and Australians. So China is trying to contend in this for the very large number of medals in swimming. But they have involved themselves in all kinds of scandals, as I mentioned earlier. So they have a way to go.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and
That they
also,
would specialize in less competitive or less popular events so that they could dominate. Of course, everyone is super talented at the Olympics, anybody who makes it, but less popular, pump people into those events so that you can rack up the gold medals and stay at the top of that medal count.
Oh, China sucks at all the popular sports. Soccer, for example, right? Basketball,
right,
and then golf. I mean, they're not good, but they're good at some of the very obscure sports events like ping pong and
I do love watching the ping pong
and shooting. But then, of course, those are medal-rich areas. So that's how China they strategize this. Cut this off.
Yeah.
They basically they plan very well. And also, you see, there's also major debate inside and outside of China about the purpose of Olympic Games for China to participate. For the Chinese team, it was pretty much devoid of individual triumph. All glory belongs to the party and the country. There's one slogan. It's called 为国争光. Every athlete is thinking that way, at least appear in public. 为国争光 means to make the country glorious. That's it. It's not about making himself glorious, making his family glorious, his community glorious. Outstanding Chinese athletes with individual spirits usually end up defecting or fleeing to other countries. The most famous case was the two tennis players. One was Hu Na. Hu Na defected to the U.S. and then eventually ended up in Taiwan in 1984. But out recently, you see, the China's tennis sensation, a woman by the name of Li Na. She's from Wuhan, and she's individually spirited. She reached her zenith of career precisely because she left the national team. She was on her own, like almost all other tennis players in the world. Many ping pong players for China, initially, they migrated or you married to some other countries and become the members of our national teams for Japan, for Sweden, for France, and for Canada. So they did very well. So that's basically the individualism versus collectivism debate in the Chinese sports world. Of course, there's also this issue of if everything is about getting medal for the country, what if you made a mistake? What if you couldn't make it? And that's basically it's a very interesting story.
Yeah, you led right into it. That was going to be my question. We've been watching the Olympics very closely, my wife and I, and my kids too. But I do legitimately wonder sometimes how a Chinese athlete might be received back home when they don't medal or they lose a gold they're supposed to get, upsetting the CCP or embarrassing its reputation on a global stage like the Olympics. But is there any actual truth behind that thought? Or
Well, it is true. I mean, because the stakes are so high, the pressure on you is not your own sense of excellence. It's because the country,
right,
how they would treat you. You remember in this Olympics a couple of days ago, there was a Chinese male gymnast. He made a mistake. He was shown to be sitting alone on the bench.
Yeah.
All his teammates completely ignored him, didn't want to say a word of comfort. And so it was very sad to watch that. And this guy just had no expression, sitting over there, ignored by his own team. Now, I'm not talking about just one particular individual. Everyone who made a mistake will be treated like that. If not necessarily by the officials in public, but definitely by the millions of internet mobs in China. The most famous case was China's greatest athlete, of course, probably in a century, a guy by the name of Liu Xiang. And he won all kinds of medals. He won probably 90% of all the international events he participated in. He was the fastest hurdler in Chinese history. He still is a keeper of the world record. But in 2008, in the Beijing Olympics, he had the injured foot. He could not possibly compete. So he withdrew. And he became the scorn of the nation. The people treat him like he's a traitor. And this man, who dedicates his entire life to the glory of the country, of the party, finally, who couldn't compete because of his personal injury, he had to leave China. He now lives in the United States with his family.
Wow.
And he vowed not to go back. Right? In contrast, you look at Simone Biles, who made a wise decision in 2021 Tokyo Olympics to withdraw because she suffered from some psychological block. She said her body and her head, mind could not coordinate. And she get tremendous support from her teammates, from the White House, from the whole nation. And a few years later, she triumphed again.
Yeah.
So that's why, that shows the difference between the United States and China, particularly in the sports arena.
Yeah, that's a great juxtaposition. So we've covered some of their sport policy, but how specifically does the CCP play politics with the Olympics?
Well, of course, the biggest political hot potato for the Chinese is the issue of Taiwan. Taiwan is participating all international sports under the name of Chinese Taipei. But China always try to politicize and ideologicalize this international sports, particularly the Olympics. You look at this year's Olympics. According to the Chinese authorities, which put a lot of pressure on the hosting organization, the hosting country, no sign that bear the name of Taiwan should be allowed, not even in the official proceedings, but also in the audience. If you hold a sign that says Taiwan, the security people will come here to confiscate your stuff. That's ridiculous. That's a shame of the International Olympic Committee for allowing China to be such a bully. Now, there was a famous a woman from Taiwan during the badminton contest when she held up the sign that shows the map of Taiwan. It's just geographic location of Taiwan. She's so proud of her country. With the words they say, "Come on, Taiwan, cheer for Taiwan," and a Chinese man, which no doubt is planted by the government of China, in the audience, and just rush to her and grab that sign and basically throw it away. And this is absolutely bullying, acted like a bully. So this is very, very sad. On the other hand, the double badminton final was played between the Chinese team and the Taiwanese team.
Oh, was it really?
Fantastic. Yeah. The Taiwanese team was a reigning champion from the Tokyo Olympics. So the Chinese government decided not to live stream this event, which caused a lot of problem for the fans. So under the pressure from the fans, so they began to sort of a live stream portion of it only when the Chinese team seemed to be winning. And when the Taiwanese team began to show their advantage, began to win, they cut off the live streaming. In the end, they completely cut it off because ultimately the Taiwanese men's double badminton team won. They created a sensation in Taiwan. The Taiwanese people are celebrating this as if it's Chinese New Year. And when they play the anthem, but it's not Taiwanese national anthem because it's International Olympic Committee would not allow Taiwan to play that. They played the Taiwanese national flag song, which is the same melody as the Taiwanese national anthem, but it was different lyrics. This is basically humiliating for Taiwan. I think the International Olympic Committee should really reconsider its policy. If you allow two teams representing entirely different population, different governments to play, the winner should be treated with respect. Particularly, it's a national anthem should be played. So, I mean, for China to play politics over there, it's really, really a shame. I think that's one of the reasons why China's ploy to salvage its terrible international reputation at the Olympics would not work.
Okay, our second topic brings us to the contested and increasingly tense Middle East right now. In late July, China hosted a, quote, reconciliation dialogue with Palestinian leaders of Hamas and Fatah, attempting to come together to form a, quote, unity government of sorts to administer places like war-torn Gaza. It sounds like the proposal that came out of the meeting, called the Beijing Declaration, was quickly shot down by Israel. But what should we take away from this, Miles?
Well, China basically wants to save Hamas from being annihilated by Israel. China is solidly behind the Hamas. China has never condemned Hamas atrocities for the October 7th. China always condemned Israel when Israel tried to strike back. At this moment in time, when the Hamas was on the verge of being annihilated, its leaders have been assassinated by Israel, and its international reputation was in the tank, and China coming in to basically force Hamas to be integrated by the Fatah, to be embraced by Fatah. Fatah, of course, represents the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah.
So what China is trying to do is to prolong the legitimacy of the Hamas, to make Hamas a part of the legitimate Palestinian Authority regime. While in the eyes of Israel, neither of them is legitimate because they would not recognize Israel's right to exist.
Yeah.
So this is basically China's ploy. This is the whole thing is really about China rigorously promoting strategic distractions anywhere in the world to the United States, which focus China, which focuses on the China threat. So the Middle East obviously is a very good spot. So this whole effort of so-called Beijing Declaration is about to prolong this strategic distraction for the United States. So U.S. will be less efficient in focus on China. China is doing the same thing in Ukraine. That's why China is solidly behind Russia in its war effort in Ukraine. China is now bankrolling Russia's war economy, providing Russia's killing machines with critical technologies, particularly drones, so that Ukraine will be another ongoing and prolonged strategic distraction for the United States. And China is doing the same thing in Venezuela.
Yeah.
Right. Venezuela, is in China's pockets. Maduro is totally in China's pockets. And Venezuela, of course, is making a mess over there. Venezuela is vowing to annex 2/3 of Guyana. And that's going to create a lot of problems. So U.S. would have to respond to that. This is China's ploy. So I don't see anything exceptional on this effort. Every time when this happens, China always is on the side of the bad guys.
Well, you paint a picture there, and we may have covered this before, but I think we can quickly retread this ground if possible. And maybe the answer is a quick no, so that's okay. But does China have real objective interests in the Middle East, but specifically with the Palestinian Authority, or is this all really just to counter Western influence and create distractions, like you're saying?
Yeah, China traditionally views the Middle East as the American sphere of influence. For instance, like first sphere of influence is the very 19th century, but China still lives in the 19th century. So that's how they view the world. So when the United States began to sort of retreat from the Middle East, all Americans' influence is waning. In the last several years, China saw the opportunity, so they move in, try to get Saudi Arabia on its side, try to get all the other Gulf states on its side, mostly by bribery. So this is all geopolitically motivated. China's interested there. Of course, there is also oil, there's also minerals, there's also all sort of other. But the whole purpose is to use the opportunity to isolate the United States as a global leader.
Okay. Finally, we shift our focus to the domestic side of Chinese politics. In short, China is getting older. Life expectancy is rising, and understandably, that's putting a strain on government support systems. I found this fascinating for anyone who doesn't already know, like me, what the retirement ages are in China right now. According to the BBC, it's currently 60 years old for men, 55 for women in white-collar jobs, and 50 for, quote, working-class women. I think the problem is pretty clear here, Miles, but what is the CCP planning to do?
Okay, so this is sort of a firestorm caused by a very short sentence in the Chinese Communist Party's third plenum communique, which was issued several weeks ago.
Yep.
That communique was very long and wordy and verbose. That's about 22,000 character mumbo jumbo. But there was one sentence, about 30 Chinese characters, that caused this national storm. It says, we're going to implement a policy based upon voluntarism and flexibility to steadily proceed with the delaying of the retirement age. As you say, the Chinese legal retirement age is very, very low. Men's 60 and women's 50 for blue-collar workers and 55 for white-collar ladies. This is about 5 to 10 years on average younger than the Western developed countries. It seems to me that China is doing this because China's pension system is in serious trouble. The government cannot pay a retired person starting at the younger age. But I think most importantly is China look at the demographic issue here.
Right.
The most productive age groups in China are being crushed by a huge army of retirees, the young grandparents. Because those young grandparents, when they're retired, they have to be supported by young couples in their late 20s and early 30s. And so because of the 4 decades of one-child policy, one young couple in their late 30s or late 20s or early 30s would have to support 4 elderly retirees.
Wow.
Plus their own children.
Yeah, right.
Right? So those people, even though they're most productive age, but they're most burdened too. So a method to solve this, it seems to me, is by putting the grandparents back to work. This is motivated by that, I think. I think consequences are going to be very profound. Number one, young people will suffer greatly at the job market because they will worsen the already extremely high unemployment rate and also extremely tight job market, especially in the non-state sector. But it will also greatly increase the size of the state sector, which means the Chinese bureaucracy, which is already huge. Now, Chinese bureaucracy in the state sector is parasitic. They don't produce anything. But they're supported by the non-state sector, which is a target of the state policy now. I mean, they just eliminated a whole bunch of other smaller, big and small non-state companies. So what we're doing is this is going to be such a big national confrontation in the years to come. The Chinese Communist Party said we have to do it. We have to implement it by 2029. So we have a few years. We'll see what happens. But nevertheless, this is an issue of a serious matter, serious consequences. We don't know exactly how it's going to affect the nation, but I think the effect is going to be very tremendous.
Yeah, can't imagine it'll be small. Usually when we hear about retirement age changes, there's a large response from the population, so I wouldn't expect anything different here. But we will cover that when that happens.
欢迎来到六度解析新闻背后的多维思考，带你洞悉头条背后的世界。在今日华尔街频道的六度解析中，我们将深入探究时事热点，为你揭开新闻背后的真相。在这个信息泛滥、真相难觅的时代，六度解析应运而生。我运用海量数据、人工智能整合以及专家观点，层层剥析每个故事，通过实时背景数据挖掘，确保你获得全面的新闻资讯。然而，我们关注的不仅仅是数据，更重要的是将它们串联起来。我将分析多方视角，揭示隐藏的脉络，为你提供单一媒体常常忽略的背景信息。无论是政治、经济，还是全球事务，我都将为你带来最具洞察力的分析。试想一下，拥有洞悉全局的能力，做出明智的决策，参与有意义的讨论，这就是六度解析带给你的价值。它不仅仅是新闻分析，更是一种赋能的工具。加入今日华尔街的六度解析，共同探索头条背后的故事。你通往深度理解的旅程，从这里开始。不要只是阅读新闻，要解码新闻，理解新闻，活出新闻。这一切尽在六度解析。立即订阅，不错过任何真知灼见。因为了解真相仅仅是个开始。